Okay, great. We'll make a start. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning, and welcome to this community roundtable event, the theme of which is integrating mental health support. So we are hosted today by the Bromley by Bow Centre. So we are very excited that so many of you have come to join us, and we're looking forward to an exciting and interesting discussion about how we can integrate community mental health support. So my name is Emma Owen and Madison, and I work for the Bromley by Bow Health Partnership, and I'm the Assistant Director for Population Health. I will just do a couple of housekeeping bits before we get going. So the event is being recorded so that people that are unable to join today can tune in at a later date. So if you would rather not be recorded, then please do just keep your camera off. But otherwise, it would be lovely to see all of your faces and see where you are. So please feel free to come on camera if you would like. We will be on mute for the most part of the meeting, but we are hoping that the chat will be the liveliest part. So please do feel free to pop your comments and your questions and interact with each other there as well. You'll also see that there's a Slido link that's been popped in the chat. So we will be having a panel Q&A, which I'll explain a bit more about shortly. So do feel free to also add your questions there. So I suppose the question is, why are we meeting today and why are we all gathered? So we know, many of us know, and many of us will be aware that mental health and wellbeing has long been at the heart of community, voluntary and primary care settings for a number of years. This is not something that is new to us. And where we're situated here in Tower Hamlet, actually, this is something that we experience and we live with and we support on a day-to-day basis. Many of our communities, as I'm sure many of you will also be aware, live with both the factors that protect our mental health and well-being and the factors that also impede it and make it more difficult. So we have everything from connected neighborhoods to people that want to support, but we also live with the very real realities of high and increasing levels of deprivation, a growing housing crisis, and many other things that make it difficult to maintain positive mental well-being. So collectively, we've reached a point that actually what we're thinking about is the more urgent need to change and develop and grow the way we deliver and design mental health support. And the aim and the purpose of today is to think about how we can do that together and also learn from each other. From our experience, we know that actually doing this and the best health outcomes are achieved when we work collectively and co-productively, and that the aim is shared of improving mental health and well-being. So today we will share some more experience about this, and we hope that it will be an inspiring event that will also give you food for thought and things to take away back to your own areas. And also, if you're in Tower Hamlets, then hopefully to build and create new connections as well. So it does feel as if slightly a bit mission critical at the moment. So we knew that the situation regarding mental health was bad before the COVID-19 pandemic, but now, as we're all acutely aware, things are a lot worse. So we have opted not to share lots and lots of data about this, as we figure that this is a shared experience for everybody. But we know that the last 2 years have really highlighted and exacerbated a lot of the issues that we knew were there, some of which are new to us, and jointly we all feel that we are all fighting to stay well physically, emotionally, and mentally. So not just for people who are working within services, but this is also of huge concern to our communities themselves as well. And in a growing sense, we're finding that this is also one of the top priorities for communities in our area, and I'm sure it's the same for all of you where you are as well. So the question is, how do we bring all of this together, and how do we work in a way how do we work in an integrated way to support and improve mental health for our communities, so the people that live and work where we are. So how the event will run is we'll have a number of guest speakers that are speaking to these topics, and they will introduce themselves and give short presentations. Throughout the presentations, as I mentioned, please do feel free to post your questions in the chat, and we will try and pick them up as we go along. After the presentations, we'll also have a panel discussion. So the speakers will come back and it'll be an opportunity to direct your questions, any queries, any thoughts or ideas to the panel speakers. And we're hoping that we will also learn from you. So please do feel free to share the things that you're doing in your own local area in the chat, and things that you've also observed and experienced through working in your local areas as well. So just to frame the event, we've got a few questions that you might like to think about. So the first one is, who needs to be around the table? If we're thinking about improving mental health support, or if we're thinking about how things could be different, who is it that needs to be involved in that discussion? Then linked to that is, where can we strengthen the partnership? So thinking about between the voluntary sector and primary care and secondary care, where are the gaps, and how can we work to strengthen these relationships? And finally, how can we work in partnership to deliver greater integration of services? So these are just things that you might like to think about as we move through the event. And without any more from me, I will hand over to Jamie, if he's here. Hi there, Jamie, just seeing you pop on. Nice to see you. So yeah, I'll hand over to Jamie, who will be our first speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jamie Stafford. I'm a Programme Director working in the Community Mental Health Transformation Programme across East London. And I've been the lead in Tower Hamlets for the best part of this year. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what we've done so far and some of the kind of drivers behind it. This slide in front of you shows some of the aims and ambitions of the Community Mental Health Framework for Adults and Older Adults, which was a document released in 2019, and sort of lays out nationally some of the ambitions for what community mental health services and care might move towards. I'll not speak to all of these specifically, but we'll let kind of people take some of them in. I've circled in blue the ones that I think either require or will be enhanced by close working between health and the voluntary sector. That if we are able to work in partnership, we will be able to deliver a lot more that leads to just improved quality of life for populations. And when we've thought about transformation and some of the sort of change which has been happening and is continuing to happen in Tower Hamlets, but nationally too, I think there's three ways of cutting at it, the three ways of looking at it, and think about structure, process, and culture. And some of the sort of structural change that's been kind of going on is bringing about new teams. The kind of introduction of neighbourhood mental health teams, which is a blended team, a blended model which brings together primary care, the voluntary sector, and mental health, sort of secondary care as it was, has kind of enabled a lot of more of a kind of integrated offer, and the kind of development of relationships between key partners. In terms of our processes, we've been thinking a lot about new ways of working, how this group of stakeholders can come together with populations to develop an improved offer. Some of our kind of key processes have been the use of Dialogue Plus to think more broadly about care planning holistically, as well as some of our new sort of meeting spaces where we've looked to try and move away from the referral culture, which is kind of pointed to here, where people feel bounced around between services. We've looked to try and bring services together to be more joined up. And finally, and probably least talked about, but most importantly, are some of the cultural changes which have been happening, that we've really encouraged a more outward-facing, population-centric way of thinking about care, rather than it being a siloed service-centric model, which has historically, I think, been a challenge in mental health services. And looking to understand and target and tackle some of the inequalities, working with the voluntary sector and working with communities much more intentionally, has been one of the most exciting areas of the work altogether. And I think we're going to hear some really sort of key examples of that today, some really strong examples of how our community connectors, for example, are just having such a huge impact in not just offering a more holistic biopsychosocial offer to people, but in shifting the culture in the system, and bringing people to a more kind of outward facing model of care which focuses on quality of life and the wider determinants of health. I think that's all from me. I don't know if there's any questions, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That was a really helpful overview, and I think just sets the scene around some of the larger transformation work that is happening in Tower Hamlets. And I think what's really important is that there may not be I know we've got people on the call from up and down the country, there may not be trust in that area that are working in this same way, but thinking about the vision for kind of working with other sectors, I think is a really important point to pull out. And I love what you were saying about kind of the 3 different areas around structure, process, and culture. And I think that the culture of, you know, thinking about who looks after people living with mental health is a really important factor within that. So thank you so much for setting the scene. And as you mentioned, yes, please do pop your questions in the chat, which we will pick up as part of the panel later. So next, I would like to invite Ruth, and I think it's a bit of a triple act. So we've got Ruth, Layla, and Emma, who will now speak a little bit as well.
Thanks very much, Emma, and afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm Ruth Roberts, and I'm the Delivery Director at the Bromley by Bow Centre. In this particular section, we're going to focus on the role of the voluntary sector in community mental health, with a specific focus on our new community connector roles, which Jamie mentioned. And I guess just the first slide, yep, it's up, thank you. Just looking at the first slide, this really, I guess, highlights the critical role that the voluntary sector plays in supporting mental health in communities. Not only, I guess, does it provide the skills and the expertise that are complementary to and distinct from those of the statutory sector, but I guess more importantly, the voluntary sector has the ability to form trusted relationships with people accessing services. So in the case of the Bromley by Bow Centre, this comes from being part of and very much embedded in the local community for the last 37 years. And I guess having a really deep connection and understanding of the local community in which we're based. And then it also has the ability to quickly and creatively adapt to changing circumstances. And we've sort of shown that over the last 18 months. And I guess in most cases, that's where we can, in consultation with those accessing services. And I guess really importantly, the voluntary sector has experience and a real focus on addressing the social determinants of health. So I know Emma and Jamie have both sort of mentioned it, but things like job insecurity, the debt and isolation, and we all know too well that health is primarily driven by social factors, not medical ones. And that, I guess, is really at the heart of what we do at the Bromley by Bow Centre and often in the wider voluntary sector. I guess voluntary sector organisations also have a real experience of working with communities who are often underserved by statutory services. So I think Amy and Arieh will highlight some of the work that's happening there through the Community Connector programme. And I guess in the case of the Bromley by Bow Centre, there's the integration of primary care provision and community sector services. So for many years, and the model of the Bromley by Bow Centre is based on integration with the primary care Bromley by Bow Health Partnership. So that's really about working together to better understand the mental health of our community and the things that affect it, and how best we can use our joint resources to really make a positive change. Second slide, please, thank you. So I guess these points highlight some of the reasons why we, the Bromley by Bow Centre, as a voluntary sector organisation, were really keen to get involved in the transformation programme and help really shape, I guess, that future model of care for mental health services. And as a result, last year we tendered to lead on the development of the community connector roles in the northeast part of the borough, Tower Hamlets. And there are 3 organisations, well, voluntary sector organisations, that deliver the community connector function across the borough, and we are just one of those. We're going to hear from the Bromley by Bow community connectors, Amy and Arieh, and also from Emma Triggs from the Women's Inclusion Network. shortly. But before we do that, I guess wanted to really highlight what for us the importance of engaging in the transformation programme was about and meant we would be able to do as an organisation. And I guess one of the first ones is very much around being able to understand and reflect the needs of the community in service provision. So as we've heard already today, we've seen a huge rise in demand for mental health services. And I guess in order to reflect those needs, it's really important to understand that people accessing services also have more varied needs, more so now than ever. And I guess therefore our focus needs to be about how we respond more intelligently to those needs. We also have a growing and changing population and really need to be planning for the future to meet those changes. And again, as we're all very aware, the issue around inequalities. So we know that the pandemic has really highlighted the underlying inequalities in our communities. And it's the fact that it's disproportionately affected marginalised groups. It's also had a significant impact on many of the social determinants of health. So people having lost jobs, people who weren't but are now in debt, people unable to pay their rent and buy food. It's quite a stark reality, really. We also as an organisation felt that we would be able to bring or link with other community assets that would enhance mental health provision and the community connector role. So I've just put a couple of examples on the slide, and that's the social prescribing and social welfare link workers. And the Bromley by Bow Centre has sort of a range of services and projects that are very closely linked to the role of the community connectors. And that, I guess, is very nicely linked to the next point, that we felt to really embed community connector roles in the established team of social prescribers. So providing access to both a range of community based support, but also join up with primary care. So very much building on that track record of delivering mental health and wellbeing. The next point is through our integrated model and close working with primary care, we were able to, or one of the things we really wanted to do through the transformation was to be able to identify people both in primary care and the voluntary sector who have a serious mental illness, who are not actively engaged in secondary care, but I guess who may be at risk of their mental health deteriorating and therefore needing secondary care support. So I suppose we're really keen to reach those at an earlier point of intervention, with a real focus on preventing people from entering into secondary care. The transformation programme and the work around community mental health has also meant that we're able to build relationships and work with, I guess, a range of communities and groups in Tower Hamlets to understand and strengthen the issues and needs of our local community. One of the motivating factors also was around engaging in the programme around our commitment and real belief in co-production and experience of involving people in developing services, which we've done sort of throughout our services, but and I know that the East London Foundation Trust and Transformation Programme more broadly are very keen in ensuring that this is a key part. And then I guess finally for us, as the Bromley by Bow Centre, it's, we're really keen on thinking about changes to our funding and contracts, and we need to do business differently fundamentally. There's huge demand and not enough resource, but this in itself is a huge topic, but I suppose it was just important to flag it here and give some examples of what we are quite keen to see change, and that's around whole system change. And I know sort of Emma mentioned it at the beginning, but interventions around improving effectiveness and outcomes and efficiency. For the voluntary sector, the importance around moving towards longer term commissioning, so funding models that support stability, sustainability, and the diversity of the voluntary sector. there's definitely been a move towards place-based funding, and that is the focus on, you know, communities of 50,000, the primary care networks, and that's very much the footprint of the transformation programme. And then I guess one of the key points for us is that with this change in commissioning and things, is that working collaboratively with the voluntary sector when planning services. So really ensuring that the voluntary sector has a seat round the table and is able to advocate on behalf of our communities within which we work. So I guess in a nutshell, from my perspective, in order to transform community-based services, there really needs to be action and investment across the whole system, not just the NHS, but clearly within the voluntary sector, who has a real critical role to play within that. And in order to do that, there needs to be resources to do that in order to work in partnership. So that felt like a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully sort of giving you some context. I'm going to hand over, I think, to Layla now, who is going to give a brief overview of how we've integrated some of our mental health work and the role of the community connectors into our broader social prescribing team at the Bromley by Bow Centre.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm going to talk really briefly, actually, because I want to really introduce Amy and Arieh, who are going to talk in a bit more detail about the community connector role specifically. So I work within the social prescribing service at the Bromley by Bow Centre, and the centre has a long history of delivering social prescribing, and it's really at the heart of the centre's model, particularly, as we've said, you know, the speakers have said throughout, you know, in response to the high levels of inequality and deprivation in our local community. And at the core of that is the recognition that there are many factors that affect a person's health, or, you know, wider determinants that affect a person's health and well-being. And that's at the core of what social prescribers are addressing. So it was only natural when the opportunity of the community connector role came to us that we would embed them within the social prescribing service and use that similar social prescribing model. But it's not to say that the community connector role and the social prescribing role is completely the same or similar. The similarities at the core is that, you know, we work with people and ensuring that everything is person-centered and that we're working in a way that matters to that person. What the community connectors bring to the social prescribing service is that they're bringing this real specialist role in supporting people with serious mental health issues. And as we all know, for those that work within social prescribing or work in other organisations, we've seen a steady increase in the number of mental health referrals that we've received within the service. And that has meant that social prescribers have had to work on some real complex cases, as well as dealing with, you know, other sort of caseloads and other major pandemics like the housing crisis and unemployment. And so having our community connectors sit with social prescribers means that we're able to work closely with community connectors in addressing mental health needs, but working in a way that's really integrated. Social prescribers traditionally sit within, or our social prescribers traditionally sit within primary care and the community, and our community connectors straddle both the community, primary care and secondary care. And that's really great, because what we're able to do is bring a voice, or, you know, our community connectors are able to kind of influence and sort of fly the flag for the wider determinants in an area maybe where those conversations and those discussions are not happening. And ultimately what we're seeing is enhanced client care, which is really great. Amy and Arieh will talk a bit more practically about what that integration looks like between the social prescribers and the community connectors. So Amy and Arieh, whenever you guys are ready, I'll let you guys speak.
Thank you, Layla.
No
Arieh's going to join as well for this part. Yeah, there you are. So my name's Amy. I'm a mental health community connector, and
my name's Arieh. I'm also a mental health community connector based in networks 5 and 6 in Tower Hamlets and Bow and Poplar community mental health team.
Yeah, so Layla's obviously done a really great introduction to kind of where we sit. Could we move on to the next slide, if possible, in a moment? So me and Arié are working within the mental health transformation project. So I've been trying to follow the chat as well, which is really interesting. So I'll try and incorporate maybe some of the things people have talked about, housing and people's participation, or how we're trying to kind of involve that in this pilot as well. So as mentioned, we're obviously working in the Bromley by Bow Centre, which is Ruth has introduced, and also in secondary care, which is the community mental health team. So I'm going to do a really quick kind of overview of what we've been doing. We started this pilot in November, but there's been lots of discussions before the build up. It's not really just about the community connector role at all, this pilot. We're just a kind of small part of it, trying to bridge together some of the sectors that are working or classically have been working in silos, I guess, and we're in between all that, which is amazing. So we sit in lots of different teams. So we're working in a really similar way to social prescribers, a holistic approach to mental health. So we're looking at the person's priorities, the wider social determinants of health, which Ruth and Layla have both mentioned. This pilot is about really developing a support plan based on the individual's health and well-being. So it's really important to kind of focus on that person-centered care, which I'm sure a lot of you will be really familiar with social prescribing anyway. So we're really focusing on the interests, the values and motivations of that person. So it's been really amazing doing this pilot because we have had a lot of flexibility in how we're going to shape it. And I think that's such a unique position to be in for me anyway. I've had a social prescribing background, so I feel really kind of honoured to have been able to kind of focus on the individual and work at their own pace, which we've been able to do obviously in the pilot. We're also working in multidisciplinary teams. So there's a new team in Tower Hamlets across the networks at the moment called the Neighbourhood Mental Health Team. In this team, we've got GPs from different surgeries. We've got occupational therapists, psychologists, nurses, social workers. The list goes on. The community mental health team were obviously already doing that amazingly in that blended way of working. The difference now is that me and Arié within our networks, and just to let you know, there are different community connectors across Tower Hamlets. So we're only kind of talking about this particular networks that we're in. So it'd be great at some point to hear from them as well, which I think Emma might be mentioning later. So yeah, it's really amazing because we're kind of sitting in those spaces and adding more of a non-medical approach to classically clinical kind of meetings essentially. So often people are kind of getting medical reviews in that space, or their pathway might lead to a psychological intervention, which of course is really important. But what me and Ari are able to do is kind of add that voluntary sector voice and non-medical approach. And then, as Layla mentioned, social prescribing and the community connector partnership is really important. We're really embedded in that team, which we feel really lucky to be part of. Obviously, social prescribing has been around for a lot longer. So we're really kind of learning from them as well. And we're really embedded in the community. So we add more of a mental health specialist to that team. And then what's working well? Obviously I've mentioned it a lot, but integrated working is working really, really well. And it's something that we're kind of noticing in the outcomes of that kind of individual, which Arié will talk about in a little bit. He'll take you through a bit of a journey of someone who's kind of had that community connector intervention. But attending these blended teams has been amazing. At the moment, we're doing daily mental health huddles with the community mental health team. So this is just a multidisciplinary meeting for, I think, about half an hour at the moment. A referral might go from a GP into the community mental health team. And in those morning meetings, because we sit in that team, we sit with lots of different professionals and we're trying to meet the need quickly. So that should just be that's a day, you know, they were referred the day before, we're discussing them the next day. And thinking about those different pathways and reducing the bouncing back, because often referrals are sent back to a GP if there's not enough information. So what we're trying to do is just move towards having conversations, not relying on referral forms with limited information, building relationships with people across different sectors. So we've got someone from employment that might sit in that meeting. And I think someone mentioned earlier about the involvement of housing. I think it might be Adele, so I got that wrong. But I think that's just such a good point, because we're really trying to do that. I think it's really important to have more housing and social care in these spaces too, because obviously we're trying to bring in the social determinants, and it is difficult if someone's going through a housing crisis and we don't have someone there to speak to. But at the Bromley by Bow Centre, we're really lucky to have a social welfare team. So we have huddles with them. I'm calling them huddles, it probably sounds weird, but basically online or in person short meetings. where we discuss maybe the housing issue with them. It might not even be that we refer them straight on. We might just have a conversation about how we can support them. So I think so important to learn from people with that specialist kind of expertise, and just kind of continue working in a more integrated way. I've already mentioned it, but yeah, the social prescribing team, we kind of work so closely with them. So we do case management meetings with them. Joint assessments have been really helpful. And then generally speaking, partnerships with other community organisations is just really beneficial for our role. We're doing a group with talking therapy at the moment. I think Khadija might actually be here, but we're kind of trying to do more partnerships. So we've got a coffee morning, women's coffee morning with WIT, who we're going to speak in a minute. So I think these opportunities that are kind of just all working together in collaboration to create more resources in the community has been really, really helpful. The challenges, of course, there will always be challenges. Being in a new role at the moment means that it's a pilot and we're working across, I think, all the possible like sectors you can imagine. So we're in primary care who use EMIS, we're in secondary care who use Rio, the voluntary sector have got their own thing. So me and Arié are obviously working between all of these, and I think some of the challenges are kind of trying to please everyone with different systems and data. But I think just to add a solution to that is that we're relying less on data and systems because we built these relationships. So I would see a GP in a meeting every week or every fortnight that I might have just sent an email to or updated a note. So I think there's a really good way of actually starting to kind of speak in person as opposed to just doing things online or by email. Complex cases, I'm sure lots of you kind of working in the community will know that, you know, people with long-term mental health diagnosis or who kind of become to a crisis are within the community and looked after in the community regularly. So I think me and Arié definitely felt that sometimes we're working with quite high risk people and that can be quite challenging for us, obviously in a kind of burnout sense, or generally just kind of that person isn't getting the right support that they need for their mental health. So one of the aims of the transformation is to kind of have this shared responsibility. So it's moving away from discharging someone from a service, which I think a lot of people are quite anxious about anyway, and can often lead to kind of someone's anxiety increasing, and seeing this new neighbourhood team as a space where that person can kind of access a professional when they need them. So whether it's me and Arié, whether it's like an occupational therapist, they can be open to that team and they can get the support they need quickly, as opposed to kind of being bounced back to primary care and then bounced off somewhere else or rejected from talking therapies or something. So essentially we're all trying to work together. So I feel like I'm waffling a bit. So we've got complex housing, which was mentioned earlier, and we're just trying to kind of involve them more in the conversation, but I think that's just an ongoing thing for us. Immigration issues, obviously, again, it's really difficult for the person. There's not that much support out there, so that's just something that we're seeing quite a lot of, those two things. There's definitely a challenge of the conflict of the different ways of working. So obviously, you know, everyone's been working in their own way for a long time. This new project is a new way of working, and me and Arié as community connectors sit in the middle of that. So we're often met with a little bit of resistance or just generally the challenges that we're kind of feeling at the moment. So yeah, that's an ongoing thing. And then strict criteria for accessing different support. So everyone has different criterias. I've noticed even in some kind of voluntary sector places, they'll say we don't accept someone who's experienced psychosis. And I think one of the aims of the transformation is to try and move away from these thresholds and diagnosis so we can increase access. But obviously we all need kind of support and training to do that. And obviously to end the challenges is just the funding in the voluntary sector, because one of our aims is to help integrate people in the community long term. And if there isn't that much going on in the community and things are closing down and groups are ending, it does make our job quite difficult for the voluntary sector.
Thanks.
Thank
you, Amy.
Oh,
sorry.
No, it's fine. You can do the next bit. That'd be great.
Okay. So the next bit is the aims. So could we go to the next slide, please?
Or if you want Arié to do the
Should I just go straight to the
yeah, I can end on the aims after if you want.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to I saw a couple questions in the chat. So one of them is around the distinction between social prescriber and community connector. So the social prescriber, just to reiterate, is situated in primary care, so in GP services. whereas the community connector, well, it's called a mental health community connector because we have a specialist in mental health, but we're situated in primary care, secondary care, so community mental health teams, and the voluntary sector. And in terms of the complex case, I think hopefully my case study will answer that. And in terms of kind of training, we have been trained to deal with serious to long-term enduring mental health issues. So that's kind of how we've got our training. But yeah, we can answer that more in the questions when we do the roundtable. But yeah, I'll just start with this patient case story. So her story starts in 2018, where she had a mental health crisis due to untreated trauma experienced as a child. She had begun to start receiving group therapy after an extended period of time for about 18 months, which she found very helpful and appeared to be her main support network. However, due to the lockdown, it was put on pause and she was offered remote therapy by remote access. However, she had hearing difficulties, so felt that she would not be able to participate or hear in a significant way. So was put back on the waiting list, and that meant that she had a big gap in the support that she was receiving. She was in this period of limbo, which is a common experience for a lot of the clients that we see. Once they've been referred from the GP to secondary care, they will be put on a waiting list for psychological treatment. However, due to demands and limited resources, this is normally a very long period of time, and this can mean that they are not really receiving the care that they need when they need it. So we heard her case during one of our integrated health and wellbeing team meetings, referral, or known as an MDT. The importance of kind of the community connector in the clinical space is kind of highlighted here, because obviously she was waiting for this psychological therapy, and there was a lens or focus on the medicalized approach. However, because we were visible in that space, we were able to influence the conversation, and together we were able to look at the wider determinants that were impacting her health, viewing from a more holistic approach, and we were able to identify more of the social factors that were influencing her mental health. And because we were there, and because we have the space to interact with that patient at that time, we were able to prevent maybe a potential relapse or a developed feeling of hopelessness. So we began the interaction with a tool that was mentioned by Jamie called Dialogue Plus, which is, as part of the mental health transformation, kind of a way to assess a patient and identify maybe the social factors that are influencing her health, and kind of a guided tour around what matters to her through her own person-centered assessment. This led to a setting of goals and eventually referrals through her consent. These were, through this assessment, we were able to identify the other social factors such as debt, housing, and social isolation, which were impacting her health. This meant that the referrals we did were to an advice centre in the Bromley by Bow Centre, which was extremely accessible because we are situated there, which is another great benefit of the community connector. Because we are able to be sitting in the community setting, we'll also be able to access the resources that the community setting offers. So, for example, the advice centre at base of the Bromley by Bow Centre, that is a really, really good asset for us to refer clients onto, and we have a good relationship with them. We also did a referral to the Limehouse Project for financial support around benefits, and a referral was also done to Hestia for a support worker for that additional support that eventually, when our care was going to end, she had somebody in place, as well as being part of that program. They offer a lot of different activities, one of them being art classes, which she was particularly interested in because it was able to be an expression for her as a form of release, to kind of express her emotions in a way that was maybe a bit more non-traditional. She also began to do horticulture at the Bromley by Bow Centre, which saw a significant improvement as she didn't have the outside space in her residence. And that was something that she knew improved her well-being. As a result of seeing her on a regular basis, she became a part of the community centre. She made relationships with the people who work there, and had essentially opened up a new world for her where she could interact with people from her community, and was able to basically be a part of something that was not only improving her well-being, but felt that she was connected to other people. She had felt that the community connector had a huge impact on improving her health, her mental health, and her social and emotional health. And I think this kind of just shows the benefit that the community connector role can have as a kind of different approach to maybe the medicalized approach, but a more community intervention. And yeah, I think that's the end of the case study.
Thank you, Arie. I'll just add, Arie did ask this particular person if they'd like to come and speak and share their story, but she didn't feel completely comfortable. It's quite an intimidating space, but just wanted to make sure you knew that. And I just wanted to answer a quick question before I finish off with just the aims of the community connector after this. So I think it's Nathan said, bringing a mental health specialist into the social prescribing, and someone else said, how do we work with complex cases? So I think the main thing just to add, which I'm sure we can talk about again later, is just the fact that we do sit in the secondary care team. So we have access to clinical supervision. I speak to a psychologist pretty much daily about complex cases that I might need to. So I think it's really using the resources within that NHS team that's so beneficial for us, and us bringing that down to meetings when we speak to social prescribers has been so helpful. I feel like I've learned so much about mental health, just kind of being in that, and feel really supported by the team there. So I think, yeah, working with those clinicians has been really helpful. Can we get the slide up just for the last little bit? I probably missed some questions, so I will go back and look through them for the bit when we open up as well. I just wanted to do a quick overview of kind of the aims that we started out with in November. So it's been a year now, which has been really exciting. But the community connector was to be embedded in primary care, secondary care, and the voluntary sector to help bridge the gap between the two, which is definitely happening now. As Ruth mentioned earlier, to reach people at an earlier point of intervention and have well-established relationships in the community, to empower people to navigate through mental health and community services, to provide practical and emotional support, as well as developing supported referral links to other services across Tower Hamlets. So in a minute, I'll talk a little bit about the community engagement that we've been doing. Have the next slide, please. And to help identify the social determinants of health that contribute to an individual's mental health and access to services, we wanted to do co-production with people accessing services. So we ran a number of focus groups at the beginning of the year with people's participation, which people were paid for their time. And that gave me such an insight into just how people were feeling, not just through obviously the one-to-one support that I do regularly. This was an open discussion about stigma, diagnosis, access to services. And that was one of the best things I think I've done this year, is really just hearing from people. So I think that's really helped. And we're kind of going towards peer support groups and co-production as a way of moving the pilot into the next stage. We want to help reduce the stigma and fragmentation in existing services to reduce the bouncing back between primary and secondary care. And then obviously I've mentioned it quite a few times, but to contribute to a blended team approach. So working with all of those professionals, which is amazing. Next slide, please. And then a little bit about the kind of community engagement we're doing. Prevention, obviously, to kind of reach people who might not be accessing mental health services. So certain groups might end up, only getting to a point where they're getting help when they reach crisis or when they're having a first episode of psychosis. So what we're kind of doing is trying to create groups in the community that talk about mental health. One of them is with Talking Therapies at the moment. Let's Talk About Mental Health, it's called. But generally speaking, we're doing some in a more informal way, without mental health in the title, to make it even more accessible, because I think some people kind of deterred by that word, even coffee mornings, things like that, which I'm sure lots of you are already doing in the community, but having that as a space to kind of have community connectors present, talk about mental health and try and direct people to the support they might need at that point, which is kind of the prevention work. So we do work with people's participation, which Jamie mentioned in the chat, to kind of hear from service users and get their involvement. And also we've been exploring the barriers that might be impacting people's access to mental health. So in particular, because of Tower Hamlets and the demographic, we're kind of looking at Bengali women who often might be referred into secondary care and then kind of bounce back due to kind of their needs not being met, language barriers and things like that. So some of the learnings we've had from the focus groups are to consider language, remove stigma, have groups in non-clinical spaces, culturally specific groups, LGBTQ+ spaces, peer-led groups, and then no strict criteria or threshold to access. I think that's it for us.
Thank you so much, Amy and Ari. I think that was a really comprehensive tour of how the community connectors are working. And I know that many people have many questions about how it works in practice. So I'll now hand over to Emma Triggs from Women's Inclusive Team, who will also say a little bit more about their experience. So thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Emma. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll keep it very brief because I think the team from Bromley by Bow have done a great job in describing the community connectors work and how the voluntary sector have worked really, really closely to make this kind of project, in particular in the transformation work, successful so far. I'll just start by, if people are not familiar with the Women's Inclusive Team, we're an organisation that have been around for about 18 years, and we were founded by excluded Black Somali women in Tower Hamlets, and WIT, as we often are referred to, has evolved through the history and through the years, and responding to community need. At the moment, through development over the last year and through the pandemic, we support women and their families, men and older people, as well as children and young people within Tower Hamlets. Our staff are made up of women and community members that have lived experience and offer representation for the community that we serve. So the community connectors work for us falls within our community wellbeing area of support for the community in Tower Hamlets. And I think a lot of our work, including our mental health work, addresses the needs of the community and challenges they have in accessing services and barriers that they might face. A large proportion of the service users that we support within the community are from the Black and ethnic minority population in the borough, and there is still a huge stigma attached to mental health issues or support within the community. And as an organisation, we work really hard to kind of offer education and influence elders within the community, as well as religious leaders that are often sometimes the first point of call for some community members, particularly around mental health. And there's still a sort of shameful stigma attached to mental health. So I think offering services like the community connectors work and the transformation work that happens across East London has been a huge, important step for the organisation, but also for the community that we support in Tower Hamlets, for us to be able to kind of break down that stigma and also to kind of advocate and support the engagement for the community to understand that they can access statutory services and services within the community, and that service is available to them. And I think a lot of our work is around that sort of support and ultimately early intervention. It is the aim of all of the work that we do. And obviously in a similar way, we have a holistic approach to mental health support around prevention and awareness for the community. And in a similar way to Amy said, obviously, community participation and involvement for us is not a tick box exercise, and we very much respond to the needs and listen to the community that we support. And I think us as an organisation, we deliver the community connectors work across network 1 and 2 and 9 across Tower Hamlets and across the borough in Tower Hamlets. So I think, and we currently have 4 community connectors that cover that space for us, and provide support and holistic hug, we call it, in the voluntary sector, around advice and guidance, and we link it very much into the services that we have at our centre in East London. And I think the support that we offer, Amy did a great description of the support that's offered, but we engage the patients and the service users around any barriers and challenges that they have connected to their mental health. And a lot of the work that we do and the focus that we have is around action plans and goal setting for patients, and encouraging them to kind of re-engage with activities that we provide, or that we can link them into other services that are available in the community. And the slide that you have on the screen is just a quote that we had from a GP in one of the community mental health areas, and it kind of encouraged us of the importance of that kind of engagement for us and for the patient. And I think another thing that we're very glad to be able to provide the community is that we're able to support them in delivering the work in community languages. So at the moment, we're able to deliver that in 4, almost 5 community languages, soon to be 5 community languages. So I think that has definitely helped us and has supported us to be able to engage the patients in a really positive way. I think the only thing that I would add from what Amy said around the sort of aims and objectives and challenges that we may have had as an organisation in terms of the blended teams element with community mental health work has been, I think in Network 1 and Network 2, we've been working in that area for over a year now, and I think it's been really, really encouraging the development that we've had within that network. I think in Network 9, it's quite new, so we've just started. So some of the challenges that we've had in a little bit of the same way that Amy described was around opening up. I would describe it as opening up the eyes of clinical colleagues around the importance and the possibilities of working with the voluntary sector and what that can offer the individual resident or patient in that way. And I think sometimes if you've never experienced that before from a clinical perspective, having a new role and understanding what that person provides, I think it always takes a little bit of time. But I think from our experience, we're hopeful that can improve. But I guess I would just end by saying that the whole purpose of the work that we do, and I'll probably in a very similar way to the Bromley by Bow Centre, is that, you know, we support the community to engage in services that are available to them, and the services are for everyone. And I think that's very important for us. And ultimately, early intervention, particularly around mental health support, is certainly the aim of everything that we do, certainly at the Women's Inclusive Team. But I would say on a whole, all of the transformation work in East London is around early intervention and access to services in general. I think that would be all I would say at this point.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma from WIT, and then all from Bromley by Bow Centre as well. And I think what's really encouraging to see is that although sometimes these big transformation programs can seem quite daunting to voluntary sector organisations, actually what's really stood out to me is the fact that this transformation program has supported the work of existing voluntary sector organisations, and is in some way, even with its challenges, enabled to continue to do the work that is so vitally important to the communities that you already have these long-standing relationships with. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm going to move us on a little bit swiftly so that we can hear from everybody and then also have time for some questions and answers at the end. So I'd like to introduce Saul Marmot from the Bromley by Bow Health Centre, who is a GP, and I'll hand over to you, Saul, to share a bit more about your experience too.
Hi everyone, and thanks for all the previous speakers. It's actually really interesting to hear everybody's perspectives, and you've taken most of what I wanted to say, so hopefully I won't be too long. My name is Saul Marmot. I'm a GP. I work for the Bromley by Bow Health Partnership. We have 3 GP practices in Tower Hamlets, and we work in very, very close partnership with the Bromley by Bow Centre. Officially, I was also employed for a year for 1 session a week by the Mental Health Transformation Programme as the Network 5 and 6 primary care lead. And as somebody pointed out in the chat earlier, I think that was a really, really positive move by ELFT to actually make some money available to try and bridge that gap between primary care and secondary care. Also working in close partnership with the Bromley by Bow Centre, obviously I've also worked on the Community Connector project and been very involved with social prescribing. And I remember being a bit nervous about this when I started and saying to one of my colleagues, isn't that a conflict of interest? But actually my colleague turned to me and said, no, it's not a conflict of interest, it's a confluence of interest, which I really like that phrase, because basically what it meant was I had the freedom to work with the Bromley by Bow Centre, with ELFT and with general practice in order to try and make this happen. So everybody's talking about mental health at the moment, aren't they? You know, it's really hard to turn on the radio, to turn on the television without somebody talking about mental health. Celebrities coming out, sports personalities coming out, and I think that this has been a massive and very positive societal shift in people's attitudes out there to mental health. Surely that shift has been reflected in health services, hasn't it? Well, actually, in reality, no, that's not necessarily what's happening. So in theory, everything that you've heard today is brilliant, and there have been some massive changes. But on the ground, what's happening is the people who we're serving, our patients, our populations, are getting sicker. And this is very much reflected, say, this Monday morning, I was on call at the practice, and I had 3 patients who phoned up specifically with suicidal thoughts before midday. And this has actually been carrying on throughout the week. All of my colleagues have been dealing with people who've got really serious decline in their mental health. And these are people often who have never even had any mental health problems. And so actually, the way we are in primary care is we feel kind of really in crisis mode. And certainly talking to my colleagues in secondary care and at the community mental health team, this is very much reflected, you know, long waiting lists, real difficulty in fitting people in, and it really feels like crisis management at the moment. So why this disconnect between the rhetoric of the Bromley by Bow Health, Bromley by Bow Centre and ELFT and what's there in reality? Now, I'm not going to invite people to tell me why there's this disconnect, because obviously we've all got some very strongly held beliefs and opinions about why this theory hasn't moved into practice. But the question I suppose that I'd rather ask is, what can we do about this disconnect? How can we capitalize on this kind of shift in public perception about mental health? And how do we shift the perspective from treating mental illness to promoting mental health? Because there's a massive difference, as we all know, between the two. So taking us back a few years, 15, 20 years ago, having a conversation with one of our first official social prescribing coordinators, and she came to me and she was really surprised. She said, Saul, 80% of referrals that we get into social prescribing service are people who've got mental health problems. Now, talking to this group here now, I don't think any of us would be surprised by that at all. And that also kind of reflects this shift that we've had. We all know that there's a really strong link between people's mental health, people's physical health, and people's social health. So about 3 years ago, ELFT and the Bromley by Bow Health decided to get together and run a little project on population health. And this basically was an interesting project that really established for us a very strong link between people's physical health and people's mental health, and really kind of highlighted for us this kind of link that if your mental health is deteriorating, your physical health deteriorates, and vice versa. And of course, adding to that is, as you've heard from everybody, all the speakers so far, people's social health, so people's social determinants of health. essentially, you've heard from the Transformation Project, you've heard about the community connectors. One of the other things that we tried to do in the transformation was address this link between long-term conditions and mental ill health. And so one of the real successes from my perspective is that we've managed to introduce 5 key questions on the wider determinants of health into every single long-term condition review in primary care. Now I'm gonna pause there for a second just to kind of let that sink in. All of our patients with long-term conditions, asthma, diabetes, COPD, whatever, get a yearly annual review. And as part of the annual review, as part of the template, we've now managed to introduce, not only across Tower Hamlets, but across North London, 5 key social determinant questions. The worry for everybody is, what do you do with this information? Fortunately, we've got a very active social prescribing team, and we've got they're very integrated with the community care team. Essentially, what we're trying to do is to try to bridge that gap between social health, mental health, and physical health. And I suppose, particularly what you've heard from the community connectors, what they do is they sit across that and they bridge that gap between the mental, the physical, and the social health. But more importantly, as you were hearing from Amy and from Aria, they're also bridging that gap between primary care, secondary care, and community organizations. So on a slightly optimistic cliched note, we've got a long way to travel between what we talk about, what we aim for, and where we're going. But rather than us individuals stumbling along the way, doing our best in isolation, it sort of seems like for the first time ever, we're actually working together. So at Bromley by Bow Health and Bromley by Bow Centre, one of the things that we've tried to do to integrate that is to integrate our social prescribing team, our population health team, and our community connector team into the same team. And this will also include the primary care GPs and nurses and the neighbourhood mental health team, as you were hearing before. So this is the first time really that what we're trying to do is integrate all of these different people with different perspectives, rather than saying, me, I'm most important in your care, I'll sign my bit of paper and send you off. What I'm saying is, I'm a part of this wider team. You know, I can look after this aspect of people and you can look after this aspect of people, but let's look after them together. And this sort of adding to that is we've also got the people participation that we've heard of. And we've got a community advisory board as part of our GP practice, all of whom are also feeding into these processes. So I suppose it feels like the only way forward for all of us is to try and work together to forget the barriers between the different organizations. So what I mentioned before, our social prescribing, population health, community connected team, these all come from different places. They come from primary care, they come from the East London Foundation Trust, they come from the voluntary sector, but we've said, actually forget these barriers. Let's all work together to make a difference to our local population health and our local community. That's it from me, really.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Saul, for wrapping that up. And I just think knowing your experience of kind of trying to make a lot of shifts in the way mental health is even thought about in our local area, I think that what you shared encapsulates it perfectly into what we've done and what we're also trying to do as well. So thank you so much. So again, thank you to all of our speakers. So we're going to move into a bit of a Q&A time now. So if I could ask all of the speakers to come back on camera so that I can see you and direct questions to you as they sort of drop through, that would be amazing. So I suppose a lot of what we've been speaking about, and a lot of one of the themes that's coming out really strongly through what has been shared and some of the questions in the comments as well, and just picking up kind of where Saul left off at the end there, was around the role of everybody to be a boundary spanner. So usually what happens is we come to work and we kind of work in our office, in our team, but I think what's been demonstrated through the presentations today is the importance of working across a number of different sectors. So I wonder if maybe Jamie and one of the community connectors and maybe Saul could just say a little bit about what that's been like in practice to actually put yourself into different contexts, work with different people in different capacities to try and do this kind of boundary spanning role that is so needed within mental health at the moment. So in no particular order, Jamie, Saul and the community connectors, perhaps you'd like to share a little bit about that.
Mind if I jump in first and just say that the biggest, most exciting thing for me that's come from the transformation project is actually understanding what other people do. And as well as what Amy was saying, which was, basically you put a face to an email address and you actually communicate directly. We had some very interesting conversations in the early days in the transformation project, where essentially the CMHT and primary care were actually learning a bit about each other's roles. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but I had no idea what most of the people in the CMHT did. And I was really surprised to hear that they had really very little idea what I did too. So I think that communication for me was the key and was the start of ideas flowing once we started to understand each other.
I don't mind just adding a little bit from community connect perspective. I used to work for Mind a couple of years ago, and I supported people with mental health needs. And I used to get referrals from the CMHT, and I just, similar to Saul, I had no idea what was going on there. I had no point of contact. It was just this like name and referral form that would come through. And I think the transformation work for me has just made me realize that I can work with anyone, and it doesn't matter about kind of your background or your training or your kind of like status or whatever it is. We're all kind of got the same aims. And like we're doing some groups with some psychologists in the community because they want to increase access to psychology in the community. Like I said, we've got the Talking Therapies group. We've got a coffee morning now with Emma and the community connectors happening. It's just made me realise that there are resources out there and so many things end due to funding. And obviously we do need funding, but if there's more people involved, it's more likely for things to be able to run. If you have more kind of service user involvement, then you've got that group which is theirs and they own it. So I think those are just some really amazing learnings for me, that we've all got the same aims and you can kind of just work with anyone if you've got that base relationship, which is what a lot of those like probably awkward meetings at the start were about. Getting to know each other took a while, and from then, like Saul referenced someone from CMHT as his colleague, and I think that wouldn't have happened before. We would have all seen each other as separate. And this is only the beginning. It's really exciting. So for me as a community connector, it's just made me feel like I can kind of just email anyone and say, do you want to have a chat about this idea? And usually it's met with a positive reaction.
I'll just throw in a couple of thoughts on this one. One, it sort of aligns with one of the questions in the chat about the team, what we're defining as a team. And I think it's a really interesting question, sort of conceptually. And we've sort of maybe blurred some of the lines about what we mean by a team. Do we mean an operational unit that's employed in one space? Do we mean a kind of group of people that work together? And the team, if you like, which kind of includes its various extensions and spread out into the wider system. One of the things that I've heard people talk about or remark on about boundary spanners, which is a great term, by the way, is that by having boundary spanners and by having this new diverse offer and growing our offer, it means we can say yes, and it means we don't have to just keep saying no. I think certainly coming from a mental health secondary care background, a lot of teams I think have found really challenging the extent to which they've had to say no in recent years to people. They've had to not offer care because of perceptions around their capacity to deliver care. And there is something about having a more diverse offer that allows people to say yes, that I think just allows people to, well, in many ways rediscover some joy in work and feel like that they're kind of able to improve and help someone in quite a kind of fundamental way. And I think as well, there's something really, really key, again, from a coming from a secondary care kind of background, there's something really amazing about this localized model, this neighborhood model, which is about a place where you're able to make a shift to seeing your role in the community differently, or your role in society differently. And I think GPs have been absolutely key in helping people make this leap, that you don't exist as a service that people enter and exit. You exist within a population, within a space. You are within this place. It isn't about people entering or being referred in and then discharged out. It's about having an ongoing relationship with this community, which is the core to the function and purpose of your team. And GPs speak so articulately or eloquently about that kind of cradle to grave offer and that role they have in a society, that I think has massively supported the cultural shift that's happened in other services, where they're then able to be part of this broader team. They're able to have an offer, and they're able to see a kind of role and value they can bring to a kind of community.
Amazing. Thank you so much for jointly answering that question. Yeah, and a nice practical example of integrated question answering as well. So that was quite nice. I know there's been a few questions in the chat and on Slido around whether this was a virtual or a physical team. And I just wanted to make the brief point that actually when this work started, we were still very much in the thick of lockdown and having to create these relationships virtually. Of course, that's been helped by measures easing, and particularly the community connectors being able to go to CMHT and then spend some time in the practices, and then also at the community centre. But I do think that it's been really hopeful to see that how this can also happen virtually as well. So I know for colleagues on the call who are working in more rural areas, or perhaps where, you know, it's harder for everyone to come together because they're not working physically in the same location, I think what we've really been able to see is the power of being able to do things virtually alongside being able to get together face to face when it's possible. So the other question that I wanted to just kind of throw in there, which was directed more at Emma and Ruth, was around what the thinking was when you went for this kind of contract. So of course we know that funding is such a huge challenge for many voluntary sector organizations. So, and it could have been quite risky to go for this kind of contract where, you know, it was fixed term, and potentially knowing all of the other stuff that's going on in community and voluntary sector organizations, it could have been difficult to engage with this size of contract and this type of contract, and also knowing that the main aim was to kind of infiltrate into the ominous secondary care. So I wanted to know kind of what your experience was of engaging in this kind of work, and yeah, any advice that you would give to other voluntary sector colleagues on the call as well.
Yeah, I think my first response to that would be, I think, you know, it's unusual, but I think ELF have been fantastic in opening that dialogue and having some flexibility and responding and listening to what we thought was needed to deliver the community connectors. So I think it's real testament actually to the way that we've worked together with ELF, and the way that it sort of formed. It feels like a genuine partnership. In terms of, you know, the actual amount, it's not huge amounts in the whole scheme of things, but it is covering the cost of the community connectors. And I think part of it for us was a true belief that we needed to give it a go, and we needed to be part of this change process. So I think it was just very much sort of aligned to the values of the organisation, and real belief in the potential of the changes and the model. So I'd say that was our sort of, the reasons why we did it, really.
And yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that would be around, I guess it's responding to the needs of the community as well. And obviously everybody, I think, has echoed the need and the increased need, and maybe the complexity of mental health support that the community might need. And I think obviously, like Ruth said, probably, I think from a voluntary sector point of view, of course, we would like the money to be slightly more. I think that's a general sense. But at this point, it is what it is. And I think we're very, it's something that we feel is important to be part of. And because it's a pilot project and we're trying lots of things out, and because certainly for us as an organisation, maybe there's certainly in an organisation perspective, some of our members and our service users are from communities that, as I said, don't necessarily access mental health support or services in a general sense. So for us, it aligned in that way, and I think that, yeah, that's why we kind of engaged in that process. But yeah, I would probably echo what Ruth said around kind of, I think the partnership has been good so far, and I think, yeah, listening, particularly in these kind of transformation work and pilot projects, I think is vital from all angles, both from a voluntary sector point of view and also from an NHS point of view. And I'm sure Jamie would echo that as well.
Amazing. Oh, sorry, Jamie, just come off mute. Yeah.
I was just going to echo that.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think what I just noted was, you know, it's important to build the relationships kind of between primary care and voluntary sector, but I think what you're saying is really also building that relationship with the commissioner as well, and actually pushing back sometimes on things that work or don't work, so that actually the funding and the opportunity works for everybody, so that the commissioner can get the outcomes that they're looking for, but also it works for the communities and the organizations that are going to be delivering that work. I have a few questions that I'm going to direct at Layla, which I hope is okay, because I think there are many questions about how the community connector role sits within social prescribing. So the question is really framed around, given the experience of social prescribing and the role that social prescribing plays in, I guess, pushing on the cultural shift in a lot of places. So we know that social prescribing has been responsible in its broader sense for a lot of changes within the health setting over the last sort of 10 years or so. But how is that kind of supporting the work of the community connectors at the moment? And then linked to that, I also wondered if you could speak a little bit about how the social prescribing framework has informed what the community connectors do as well. So two sort of 1.5/2 questions for you, Layla.
Thanks, Emma. So the first question was around how the social prescribers support the community connectors within their role. As you said, like the social prescribing service at the centre has been running for a number of years, and so the community connectors are really fortunate to be able to be sort of guided by the social prescribers when it comes to delivering sort of person-centred frameworks. What we've done within the social prescribing service is set up case management meetings between the social prescribers and the community connectors, so we can start getting them to kind of work in a blended way and almost model what's happening for Amy and Arieh in the community mental health teams through sort of like the blended teams, trying to kind of replicate that approach with social prescribers and community connectors. So rather than sort of looking at cases in isolation, letting the community connectors and social prescribers approach cases together. And that's been really helpful, not only for the community connectors, but for the social prescribers who don't really know a lot, don't really know a lot about how secondary care works. They're certainly used to kind of seeing referrals to the CMHT coming from their patients, but they don't know a lot about how community mental health teams work. And so having Amy and Arieh in the team gives us a real insight as well. As well as that, what we've done is we've set up referral meetings. So ideally what we want is the social prescribers to focus, when it comes to mental health needs, focus on more of the low and moderate mental health needs. And that allows for the community connectors to focus on more serious mental health issues. So what we've done is we've set up referral meetings between community connectors and social prescribers. So social prescribers can bring cases to the community connectors to see whether there's any overlap or scope for the community connectors to come in and sort of support with that intervention. In terms of training and development for the community connectors, they go through exactly the same processes that our social prescribers go through when it comes to induction. So they're a part of all of the training and development that social prescribers have. And that just ensures that we're working in similar ways when it comes to approaching things in a holistic and person-centered way. So that comes to your framework question. We're working with the same framework ultimately community connectors and social prescribers, at the core of that, we are ensuring that we are getting to what matters to people the most, making sure that that care is really personalized. The only difference is that, you know, community connectors are situated with the CMHT as well, but ultimately the core of that support that we're providing is the same, is similar, is holistic. We're making sure and ensuring that we're identifying what those wider determinants are and making sure that we're getting people the right support.
Amazing, thank you so much, Layla. And I think this goes to one of the questions around how are the community connectors trained and what qualifications do they have? And I think Jamie answered the question in the chat that this is an ongoing process and they come with many professional backgrounds. But what I think is really important about what you're saying is that actually by being a part of that team, the learning is continuous in both directions. And it means that the social prescribers are able to learn from the community mental health landscape in its entirety, and also the community connectors are also able to kind of benefit from years and years of social prescribing. I think what's really important to add into the mix as well is that people living with mental health don't always come through one particular prescribed route, and it's very possible that we would be working with somebody, or say we, that the team would be working with somebody that they've met from a number of different contexts, and being able to have that expertise in the team, wherever that person comes from, it means that they'll get the right support at the right time. So thank you so much, Layla. Saul very politely has his hand up. So Saul, yes, over to you.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute. Yeah, very, very much sort of dealing with what Layla was saying. There's a beautiful example of a patient who I've been seeing a lot recently. She has got long-term enduring mental health problems and was sort of kind of coming up a bit of a crisis. Now, she was being looked after by one of our social prescribing team and looked after quite intensively. The social prescribing, the social prescriber and myself were having lots of conversations about this. When the community connecting teams started and they were embedded within the same team as the social prescribers, she then started getting support from Amy, who then slowly over kind of a negotiated period took over the social prescribing role because this lady had kind of more serious enduring mental health problems. So then Amy and I and the social prescriber started communicating very well. This communication then spread to the community mental health team, and more recently, when this lady was sort of teetering on the verge of crisis again, this is where I think the neighbourhood mental health team really comes into its own. So it's not just about a daily or a weekly meeting. It's about the fact that I was able to communicate with the psychological therapies team, with the community connectors, with the social prescribers, with the consultant psychiatrist, with the social worker, all of these people as part of one team in order to try and prevent this lady from deteriorating. And obviously, you know, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but at the moment she seems more stable than she seemed in quite some time. And that to me is really what the neighbourhood team stands for. I'm not going to pretend that there are no problems with it, and there is a lot of resistance to the neighbourhood teams from a lot of the GPs in Tower Hamlets at the moment, which is quite surprising. But watch this space. Perhaps in a year's time, everybody will be working in the same sort of integrated way.
Thanks so much, Saul. So I'm really conscious of the time. There's lots of questions, and so please do feel free to get in touch with the team if you would like. If anyone would like to pop their email address in the chat that people can follow up with, or if you have any specific questions, please do get in touch with, I think the Insights address is, Berenice, if you're still around, if you could pop the Insights address in the chat, then that's a good way for people to get involved if you would like more information. The Bromley by Bow Centre do a number of kind of insights opportunities, so we're happy to work something out for people that would like more in-depth conversation about some of the work that's been happening. So to finish us off, obviously we know that this is, although we've been a year in progress, there's a lot to do, and I think the scale of the sort of mental health crisis not only in our communities, but in the country, in our personal lives and beyond is huge. So we've got a lot to do, and we've got a lot of boundaries to continue spanning and dissolving. So I'm really hopeful that this will also continue and that this work won't stop in the near future. But I wondered if maybe all of the speakers could just maybe say one thing that you're hopeful for about this work, just to end us off before we finish at 2 o'clock. So we'll start with Amy. We'll start with Amy. What's your one hope for this work in 10 seconds?
I just think that it continues for me. So many things can kind of work in a pilot scheme and then end. I think for me, it's just building that community link that things will just continue, and just, you know, the positive work will continue on.
Amazing. Arieh?
Yeah, I just hope that the integration between primary and secondary care and the voluntary sector strengthens as time goes on through the community connector role.
Thank you. And Emma?
I think I would just say, yeah, building on the good work, essentially, is how I would describe it. And from a long-term perspective, making it count, all of the work that we're doing collectively, individually, that, like Amy and Arieh said, that we get something at the end of it, that for everybody, for different organisations, for the NHS, but also for, you know, for the community that we support. So
amazing. Thank you, Emma. And then Ruth?
I was going to say momentum, but Amy sort of said that. So I would say about, I guess, that we continue to really challenge and push the boundaries. It's uncomfortable and it's hard, but it's worth it.
Thank you so much. Layla?
Yeah, I would say agree with everybody, but I'd say definitely continue, especially as we're in this post-COVID world, and you know the need is only going to get a lot higher and a lot more complex. So to continue this work and to continue the partnership.
Amazing, thank you. And then Saul?
I just hope that this kind of idea of the social health, mental health, and physical health being one thing in one person is something that we can kind of spread throughout the country, and maybe get some funding for organizations like us to actually maybe do some work on it.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jamie.
Oh, I think completely everything everyone's just said. Really, the point around co-production feels just so important to keep coming back to, and working in partnership with communities, and bringing service users in to shape this with us, I think, is the other kind of really key bit that I hope we can keep pushing forward on.
Amazing. Thank you so much. With all of that being said, it's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you all this afternoon. Hopefully soon we'll be able to do this kind of thing in person a lot more. So looking forward to that as well, and looking forward to hearing about all of the work that everyone on this call continues to do over the coming months and years. So thank you all, and hope you all have wonderful afternoons and the rest of your weeks as well. Take care and speak to you soon. Bye.